All right, Janae, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation because I think there's a lot of stigma around it. I see it in the work I do, especially with couples or even individuals. There's a lot of shame around it too. And obviously, you have your own stories. So it'll be interesting to see how your story fed into some of the work you're doing. But before we jump into our conversation around the stigma of sex, especially in relationships, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what's brought you here today.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm excited about having an easy conversation with you and your listeners about how to improve their sex life
Hmm.
because that's what I'm very passionate about. My own personal story is I have a lot of experience with problems around sex.
Hmm.
In my own experience, I lived in a sexless marriage for 26 years, and that's a very long time
Hmm.
to be in a sexless marriage. And had my own reasons for that, in large part due to some sexual shame trauma that I had as a child, which caused me to be totally disconnected from my body and my sexuality. And
Hmm.
sex was very painful for me. I got married at the ripe old age of 24 years old, which, is very young for most
Hmm.
people these days.
Yes.
And sex was a problem. There was a lot of drama associated with it, a lot of tears associated with it, a lot of pain associated with it, no pleasure. And I eventually, after I had my second child at 28, I just decided I'm done. Like, I can't do this anymore. It wasn't a conscious decision. It happened, I guess, a little bit slowly over time. There were still
Right.
tears and drama, but probably by the time I was 32, we were pretty much done having any type of
Hmm.
intimacy whatsoever. And we lived in that space for another, I don't know, 16, 20 years. It's like about 20 years was a long period of time.
Hmm.
And as I'm sure you've seen as well, when, sexual intimacy starts to leave a relationship, intimacy starts to leave the relationship as well, and
Hmm.
we probably were not so great and emotionally healthy to begin with,
Right.
right? We were both young, 24, 26, lawyers. We didn't know what we were doing. We certainly didn't
Hmm.
know how to communicate about what was going on for us, nor did I actually even know what was going on for me, to be
Hmm.
honest. And in some ways, it was very lonely. I'm a lawyer. I was anyway, a healthcare lawyer. And so I
Hmm.
was able to take all my energy, throw it into my business. I built a consulting practice around that and
Hmm.
my children. And it didn't leave a lot of space for me, but there was a lot of emptiness and pain
Yes.
inside. I know you've probably seen that in clients I say this to my clients all the time, like the loneliest place you can be sometimes is in a marriage, right? In a
Hmm.
long-term relationship. And so when I finally left the marriage at age 50, I had to really take a hard look at who I am and what's going on for me and why am I feeling so broken? Because I did at that point felt totally broken
Hmm.
around my sexuality and my body and my pleasure. And that just took me into the beginning of this big personal journey that I went, this sexual awakening and healing journey that I went on that ultimately led me to decide, you know what? I'm not going to be a lawyer anymore. I'm going to get out of the corporate healthcare world. I'm actually going to do something I'm super passionate about, which is helping other women and couples and men who are having challenges around sexuality be able to heal that because there was nobody there for me when I was 28 years old or 30 years old and really struggling with this. So
Yeah.
now I've been doing this for 15 years. I'm a full-time sex and intimacy educator and coach. And I run private retreats for couples in Asheville, North Carolina.
Hmm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing all that. And there's so many aspects of your story that I see people struggle with. And immediately, if we were to jump right into it, there's reasons why people may stop having sex in their relationships or even not talk about it. So we'll definitely get into some of that, but some of the reasons that I could see, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts. So you touched on trauma.
Mhm.
That trauma is not resolved. It can be, it can have some detriments in the relationship. But the other thing I've seen also is when there's this trauma, people will act out in different ways too.
Mm.
They may indulge in it more. The other piece I see often is the body image issue too, that can create shame for many people, and they may refrain from making themselves be vulnerable and expose themselves to that. So that could get in the way at times. For many men, what I see is performance,
Mhm.
and that gets into their head, and that
Mhm.
unfortunately prevents intimacy too. So they'll avoid putting themselves in that position, or they'll be overthinking it too. So there's these reasons that I could see that come up. I don't know if I've missed any. I'm sure I have. So I do want to get your thoughts on that
Yeah.
and what you've observed in your work too. What are these reasons and why are they coming up for people, and how can they make sense of it?
Yeah, excuse me. I think there's so many. That's the thing, right? There's so
Yeah.
many different possibilities of why you're feeling challenged around sexuality.
Mhm.
Trauma obviously plays a very big role in it for many people. And it can, as you're right, it can show up in different ways. There can be an overindulgence,
Mhm.
like sometimes a porn addiction or having multiple partners. Or there can be, I don't want to be touched. I don't feel comfortable being touched. I don't feel safe. And very often I see this in married couples or people in long term relationships. I see some of this trauma coming out after the new relationship energy phase, which is the first 6 to 8 months, has stopped because
Mhm.
in the beginning there's all these hormones, there's all the dopamine that's just flooding the system and overriding the fear, the amygdala, the fear part of the brain that makes you feel like, oh, I'm over it. And then all of a sudden, those hormones die down and all of it comes flooding back. And I know that can be very challenging. And I think everybody has performance issues, right? Like men have significant performance issues, but women have performance issues too. A lot of women feel a lot of pressure. They feel pressure to perform, pressure to give to their partner, pressure to act like they're having pleasure, which when maybe they aren't, right? So that's one of the things that really messes everybody up. And, I think the bigger piece of that is the reason that's such a problem is because rather than being in our body, which is where sex actually happens and where connection happens,
Mhm.
we're up here in our head
Mhm.
thinking about it. And that takes you totally out of the experience. And I think that's a very significant issue for a lot of people is not being embodied. So all of my work is really using a very embodied approach to sex and intimacy as well. And I think also another yeah, shame is a huge block, right? Whether it's body shame for women and for men,
Mhm.
right? Whether it's like what I had, just shame from being given all of these negative messages around sex, or as I was caught playing doctor in first grade with a girlfriend, and her mother walks in, and then you feel like, oh my God, you get this huge lashing from your own parent and
Mhm.
your whole relationship with your body and sexuality and what kind of was fun and interesting completely changes and creates a lot of pain and a lot of anxiety. And that is a very common experience. It's what I call our sexual blueprint, the messages that we received around sex growing up, the messages we received around intimacy, how that was modeled has a huge impact on our relationship with sex as an adult. And that can
Mhm.
either be positive, but for a lot of people, it's very negative.
Yeah, for sure. So now there's stuff you're sharing that comes up for the individual,
Mhm.
but now in the relationship, other things can come up, and that's something you and I chatted about before. But
For sure.
children, so as lovely as they are, they do at times, especially early on, can
Yes.
create challenges and
Yes.
sometimes parents have a really hard time getting their children out of bed, right? Like they'll be sharing the bed
Yes.
for many reasons. So that can also get in the way of intimacy. So, what do couples do in those types of situations where children are a roadblock at times?
And this is true. And I always tell couples like children can really screw up your sex life. That is just reality,
Yes.
unfortunately. And so can dogs, by the way, because I've had a lot of couples who have dogs in their bed as
Yeah.
well. That also has a huge impact on intimacy. When your kids are really young, it's hard. You can't put a lock on your door. Not possible, right?
Mhm.
The children have to be able to access you, and you never know when they're gonna come in. So sex ends up being a catch as you can. Oh, they're both asleep. We're having a nap. Maybe we can have sex now. But I would also say that I encourage the couples I work with, young children, to have caregivers who can come in and give them a night off so they can go to a hotel. So they can sometimes swap with another. I've seen this too, like swap with another family. You take care of our kids, we have the night off, and then we'll switch and do it for
Mhm.
you. So that you have to make some priority around the relationship, which is hard when you have little kids. Also, like, just being able to have some time with intimacy, even and I have a whole philosophy on what sex is and how
Mhm.
we misdefine what sex is, which is part of the problem.
Mhm.
But giving yourself some time, just what if we just had a 5 minute makeout session before we went to bed, right? Doing little things to keep the sexual energy up can be very important and helpful, especially when there are younger children
Mhm.
involved.
Mhm.
But as they get older, and yes, kids sleeping in beds, that's a huge issue.
Mhm.
I get why they do it. We had our kids in beds at times, but it's a problem, right?
Mhm.
Because then the bed is no longer sacrosanct.
Mhm.
It's no not longer the place for intimacy. It's now like the family room. So, finding other places to have sex in your house is another really great idea, just like changing it up a little bit. But I also think as children start getting a little bit older, then I think it's important to model that, like, mom and dad are going to shut the door on Saturday morning or whatever it
Mhm.
is. And you all can go get your little breakfast and get on your iPads or whatever they do. And we're going to lock the door. And if you really need us, you can knock. We need some time alone. I think
Mhm.
it's really important that we start modeling to our children that intimacy is a normal, important part of a relationship between
Mhm.
two people. And I advocate for that as well. I don't know.
Mhm. Yeah, fair enough. Now, that's assuming that both people in the relationship are on the same page, which may or may not be always true.
Right.
So sometimes you could see one person perhaps just using the child or children as an excuse because, like you shared in your story, that it's something they're not comfortable with. So,
Right.
what I'm trying to get at is the communication piece because we've talked about all the ways things can get in the way. And we're also going to talk about some consequences of lack of communication. So,
Mhm.
how do you build in communication, which can be tough because, as we've shared here, there's a lot of shame. People's preferences can change with time as well, right? So,
Totally.
what worked early on in the relationship, things evolve. Now it's probably different. So, how do you talk about that? How do you talk about shame for yourself? How do you talk about your needs? So, there's many layers to that, but it all comes down to communication,
Totally.
which can be very tough because many people feel shame even about talking about it or expressing their needs or asking for things. So, and there's fear of rejection, right? So how do you have
Yes.
specific boundaries? Not everything is going to work for everyone. So how do you talk about these things and preferences and even the shame that you might be feeling on an individual level?
I think that you have to come into it through a space of really wanting to be vulnerable and authentic with each other,
Mhm.
which can be very challenging at times, especially if there's wounds in the relationship, there's conflicts that haven't been repaired. So,
Mhm.
you know, in the ideal world, like we teach people this at the very beginning of a relationship. Like these are really important communication skills, like active listening to your partner, hearing what they're saying, like empathy is one of the pieces that I think is perhaps one of the most important skills in a relationship is being able to empathize with your partner, right? Rather than invalidate their feelings, which is what we do all the time.
Mhm.
So I think you start small. Sometimes I'll recommend like read a book together, right? Find something where you can start to have a little bit more structured conversation rather than just like feeling like you're opening up a Pandora's box, which I think a
Mm.
lot of couples are afraid of. Wow, if I start opening this conversation, where is it going to end? And what's going to come out about what my partner feels or what I feel or what we've been holding back. So I always suggest starting small. I think in my own work, I feel like the way people can really start to connect with each other is through their eyes. So, like, just spending 5 minutes sitting with your partner and looking in their eyes, right? And just noticing the feelings that are starting to come up.
Mm.
Whatever it is, maybe it's tears. So often we don't establish eye contact. We're very bad with that in
Mhm.
this society. And for a lot of people, it feels super vulnerable. It's a very intimate thing to sit with somebody's eyes for a minute or 30 seconds, even. But beginning to work that muscle, I feel that's a very important muscle in starting the communication because our eyes say a lot
Mm.
about what we're actually feeling. And I think often we get caught up in too many words
Mm.
without actually being able to feel the feelings, to feel the emotions, both inside of ourselves and with our partner.
Mhm.
But these can be hard conversations to have. So I always like to start slow and maybe start with something that's not a huge issue in the relationship, right?
Yes.
Not the elephant in the middle of the room, something small. I'll have couples often if they have a hard time communicating verbally, I might say, like, why don't you each write down on a piece of paper 5 things that you really enjoy doing,
Mhm.
that you've really enjoyed doing with your partner? And then maybe 5 things that could have been better.
Mhm.
And that's an opportunity for people to have a little bit of time to process it because often it's easier to write than it is to actually look at your partner and say something that might cause them pain. That is what it is being in a relationship, right? We know we're going to hurt each other.
Yeah,
We hurt the people we love. We just have to learn how to repair
for
those.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
repair part is so important because I think
I
we
know.
don't take it that seriously, or we often underestimate the power of repair.
Yep.
Now, we will get back to repair. There's other ways I've seen this play out. I've seen playful ways of talking about these things. Like I've seen card games that you could
Hmm.
play and really have these
Yep.
conversations. So that can break the ice or
Yep.
even lessen the tension around the topic so it doesn't feel so, yeah, it doesn't feel so intense, right? That, oh, I don't want it. So you can actually simplify it in that case. Now,
I do. There are a bunch of card games that I really enjoy. Esther Perel has a great one, and there are some other great intimacy ones
yes,
where it's not even about talking about sex. It's just about starting to share about some of your
yep,
personal experiences and beliefs that maybe you've never had those conversations
yes.
before. Because very often we may not have had those conversations. The relationships can be very surface for a very long period of time. So, yeah, I love that idea as well.
Yeah, and I think part of it is ultimately lack of connection, right?
Absolutely.
And that could be a leading indicator of what is to come in the relationship. But then there's other consequences which can be cause or effect. And we've touched on it, like porn can be a huge
Mhm.
factor. And I see it show up in so many different ways where people have porn addictions coming into the relationship or they
Mhm.
develop it over time, or it can also be a consequence of lack of intimacy where people may then turn towards porn. So there's that's a huge topic. I see this play out in so many ways that's affecting intimacy. And then the partner on the other end may feel abandoned or may feel almost cheated on.
Cheated on. Yeah.
And then there's the real infidelity too, where people go outside the relationship, and often it could be for the purposes of sex, but it could also be seeking a connection beyond the
Right.
physical side of things. So there's so many consequences around that can be either leading to these behaviors or causing some of the issues within the marriage. So how do people navigate these things? And because the biggest challenge I see with porn, people don't appreciate the correlation of how it can affect their intimacy with their partner as well.
Yeah. I guess I would say the place I would want to start is the thing that you said towards the end is like it's lack of connection that's causing all of this, right? I think we know in the world of addiction, the one of the ways to help people overcome addiction is through feeling human connection. So, the first thing is if you can get to the place of can we start to feel a little bit more connected with each other? Because that is the root cause, lack of communication leading to lack of connection is the root cause of so many of these challenges, right?
Mm,
That's why people may go to porn if the connection is lacking in the marriage. But it's true, a lot of people, especially the younger generation, especially, are
mm,
really coming into sex and relationships with so much like their whole worlds around sex is what they learn on porn that has
mhm,
become the sex ed, if you will. And we know that it's incredibly unrealistic and can be very harmful as well. And it can create addictive behaviors because you're actually not feeling what's happening in your body. You're so visually focused on what's happening on a screen. And yes, infidelity, especially an emotional affair, because I think those are some of the hardest ones to really help a couple heal from because that is such a deep wound, feeling like your partner has fallen in love with somebody else and is putting all of their emotions someplace else. That's a big betrayal.
mhm,
And when you actually, as when you actually get into it and you start unpacking, everybody recognized there are reasons that this happened. And 9 times out of 10, the reasons are that this couple was not connected with each other. They were not
mhm,
communicating with each other. They didn't feel emotionally safe with each other. So these are all really big pieces and consequences of being disconnected from a partner. And I think that many of them, I don't know that you can get through all of these by yourself. I think you do need to seek outside support, a therapist, a coach, right? Some outside professional who can be objective and can help you move through some of these pieces. But
mhm,
what I want to say is that I think a lot of people get really anxious that I'll never be able to do this. I'll never be able to be vulnerable with my partner. I'll never be able to communicate with them.
mhm,
I'll never be able to have sex with them the way they want to have sex. And, I believe that all of these are skills that can be taught and can be learned, right?
mhm,
It's not like there's some magic thing out here, but they're actually skills that we teach people all of the time. And I want your listeners, if you're struggling with some of this, to realize, take a breath.
mhm,
These are all skills that can be learned. You can learn how to communicate. You can learn how to be vulnerable and authentic. You can learn how to repair a conflict, which you and I agree is the marker of a healthy relationship is the ability to repair conflicts. We all
mhm,
know that, right?
mhm.
And you can learn how to be a great lover. All of those are skills that can be learned, and it's important to understand that, right? Like, you're not floating out there in the abyss, not able to heal that. It's
Right.
all healable.
Yeah. Yeah, and there are some conflicts you can't really come back from, right? So as much as if there has been infidelity or some form of betrayal, it's hard to come back from that. So you could try, but I think you need both people on the same page. And even then, in some instances, the pain or the cut is too deep that you
Sometimes.
can't. But there's the other piece you talked about disconnection with partner, but there's also the disconnection from self,
Yes.
right? So I don't want to undermine anyone's pain of betrayal, but when there is betrayal, often it's not about the other person, it's about me as an individual where I'm
Totally.
at, and because I'm disconnected from self, I can't connect with another person. So often I have to remind people that where's your connection to self? Even if you're in terms of wanting to repair the damage that's been done, it needs to start with you. And I don't know if people necessarily put a lot of emphasis on that too. So again, just want to get your thoughts around that in
Yeah,
terms.
I do think we all have to do work on ourselves, right? But in my philosophy has basically been that the most healing that you can do is in the context of a romantic relationship. That's where true healing actually can happen. And personally I don't tell my couples, "Oh, go do work on yourselves and then we'll come together and work on healing the relationship." It can happen simultaneously.
Mhm,
It's good to have that as self-awareness. It's good to have more of that connection with your own feelings, which I
mhm.
find, especially for men who I work with, have a really hard time often connecting with sadness,
Yes.
connecting with fear, and then being able to actually communicate that. So yes, like working with yourself through breath work, through slowing everything down, through taking a moment and just have a second and just close your eyes and just say, what's happening inside of me? Where am I feeling it in my body? What are
Mhm.
the emotions that are going on? And yes, I think doing our own work on for a lot of us, for all of us, right? All of this stems from childhood wounds.
Mhm.
What I always say when I have a couple facing me in a room is, "I'm what 2 children am I looking at
Right.
here? What are their wounds? How are they interacting? How are their wounds perfectly interacting and triggering each other?" Right? And so having an awareness of your own childhood wounds and working through some of that, I think is important. And a lot of them are attachment wounds, right? That is obviously what creates insecurity in a relationship. But I believe the way to help heal that, to create secure attachment, is in the context of working with a couple in a relationship and helping them learn how to be vulnerable, how to be authentic, how
Mhm.
to be able to hurt each other. Well, they hurt each other all the time.
Right.
We know we do that,
Yeah.
but how to be able to repair that hurt and
Mhm.
not let that completely blow them open, which
Right.
it often does,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
shut them down.
for sure. I think the responsibility for self is so important because otherwise you'll keep tripping over each other's trauma.
Right.
So how can you take responsibility for your individual side of things, but then work on healing together? But I do agree with you that relationships can be our greatest teachers, but we also have to be aware of the role we're playing and what is
Yep.
ours to focus on and not necessarily focusing on the other person because you can see a lot of times in these types of situations, especially if there's betrayal, it's easy to blame the other person for the
Mhm.
pain they may have
Mhm.
caused, but then you're not necessarily focusing on your own growth. So I think it's important for to have both things. Now, around the communication piece, there's all kinds of statistics, but let's maybe talk about in terms of sexless marriages. What
Yeah.
are some of the statistics around that? And then I want to get into the frequency side of things too. But yeah.
Yeah. So I think the literature says from the latest surveys that were done that it's like 15 to 17% of couples are in sexless marriages, which is officially defined as having sex less than 10 times a year. So basically once every like 6 weeks or so. I think that most couples therapists would tell you that number is so low because it's a self-reported number. And I think we all know that there's probably a much higher percentage of couples that are in sexless marriages, especially in long-term relationships, especially as they age. I think that's probably much more frequent and a higher prevalence for so many different reasons.
Mhm,
But I think it's a lot more common than people are talking about, which is why I'm so passionate about talking about that there's an epidemic of sexless marriages in
mm,
this country that we're really not talking about.
mm,
And it's part of the reason why the divorce rate is so high as well. A lot of times, sexless marriages do lead to divorce, either because somebody goes outside of the marriage to have sex, or they're just like, they've come to a place like I did with my partner where it was just the relationship became so toxic, like we just had to leave. There
Mm.
was no repair possible at that point.
Yeah, for sure. And
Yeah.
frequency wise, right? So there's all kinds of numbers that get thrown around. And I think we tend to fixate on a number and then we'll compare, and that can also lead to shame. But it
Mhm.
may vary because things do happen, right? People go through things, and as we've talked about, life situations change. So
Right.
it's easy to fixate on a number and then get very rigid with it. But I think you also need to have that communication piece that we're talking about and maintain some level of flexibility. But frequency, what are your thoughts around that?
Honestly, I am not a numbers person, right?
Yeah.
If a couple is super happy having intercourse once
Mhm.
every 6 weeks, but they have other intimacy during that other 6-week period of time, and they're both happy with the amount of sex that they're having and feeling connected, I'm like, "Great, you're good."
Right.
Because I think it's quality rather than quantity in my book. And couples ask me all the time, what's the average of what people are having sex? I don't even
Yeah.
answer that question because it's going to create pressure and it's going to create shame. It's what really works for you. And then also, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, like, how do we define sex?
Mm.
If we only define sex as intercourse, right? Basically, penis and vagina, which is
Yeah.
what we call PIV sex, then I think that's a very narrow definition of sex.
Mm.
I think anytime you're having an erotic connection with your partner, even if you're reading an erotic story together or you're sexting each other, there's
Mhm.
a sexual relationship happening. And I define it as like anytime you feel turned on, anytime there's eroticism in the
Mhm.
room, you're having sex.
Mm.
And so I think that takes the pressure off
Mm.
because then you have a lot more opportunities to be able to have smaller, maybe larger, I don't
Yeah.
know, sexual experiences with each other
Mhm.
where it feels intimate, you're feeling some eroticism, but you don't have to necessarily have the pressure of performance if that's not what you want to do, right?
Yeah. And bringing back the porn piece, because if someone is indulging in that, it's also changing your perception of what a sexual relationship is, and that can get in the way.
Totally.
So that's where, again, what do you do if you've got a partner who's just in a different world? How do you communicate around that? And then the other piece is, what if your worlds apart on even frequency? And again, to
Yeah.
your point, the definition is very subjective. So then how do you align on what your definition is? But then how do you even align on frequency? If someone wants it multiple times a week and the other person's, no, I'm happy with twice a month. So how do you find a compromise and meet in the middle where both people can be having their needs met? And that often results in conflict too, from what I've observed.
Yeah, for sure. Let's start with porn. I
Mm.
think that these are, again, you have to have a conversation with your partner, right? I'd be curious,
Yeah.
like when you're watching porn, what's happening for you? What's the goal? What are you wanting? Is it just that you want to release? Is it the visual excitement of it? Like really trying to understand what's happening. Is it really become an addiction? There's just a huge dopamine rush that's constantly happening. And then maybe you do need to look at it from an more of an addiction perspective versus, and this is me, right? This is what I counsel my clients. What would it be like to explore porn with your partner?
Yeah.
Maybe you can identify, oh, this is something that turns you on. This is something that turns me on. Maybe we
Mhm.
can find some porn that we both like together. So rather than making it like a sin, and I don't like to use that word, but I've heard it,
Yes.
make it as something like, oh, let's get curious about this. Let's explore it. Let's see what's actually here for you and maybe something that's actually here for me. I yeah, when I help couples really understand where they're disconnected and what they're looking for sexually, I help them identify what we call core desires,
Mm.
which are the emotions that you want to have when you're having sex,
Right.
right? And so I'd get curious about what kind of emotions are happening for you. What do you fantasize about, right? These are all very much related. So using it as an opportunity rather than as, and I get it, some women feel like my partner's cheating on me, or some men maybe feel like my partner's cheating on me.
Mhm.
But I'm very much about deshamifying and try to normalize everything,
Mm,
because we're all different creatures. We all have different sexual desires. They come from different places. And the more we can honor each other's desires, as long as it's not interfering significantly, and figure out a way to make it a win-win
mm,
rather than a win-lose situation.
mm,
And I would say similarly to in terms of the frequency issue, I believe, and I wrote a whole book about it, right? That everybody's responsible for their own arousal and their own orgasm. It's not your partner's responsibility
mm,
to get you off, and it's not your responsibility to get your partner off.
mm,
I'm happy to be in the if you want to masturbate and you want me to sit there and participate in it participate in that with you because I'm not in the mood to have sex. I'm happily sit there and stroke your hair and
mhm,
stroke your back of your neck. I can participate in it without me having to have pressure around it. And I think,
mm,
again, we have to be more creative and we have to be more expansive when we're talking about helping couples learn how to navigate desire and mismatched desires, which is also very common.
mm. Yeah, no, fair enough. So there is a slippery slope, right? So if you open the porn box, it can become a gateway, which can be risky, right? One person may then just run with it, right? And that's where I see a lot of times when couples open the box for open marriages, for example, that can also be a slippery slope because then expectations can change, needs can change, and then where you may have gone into something like this on the same page, immediately now both people could be on separate pages and it could be hard to
100%.
rein things in because I've seen enough examples of that leading to the end of the marriage because now one person is like completely involved in this world, right? So, how
Yeah.
do you maintain those boundaries and how much is too much when it comes to experimenting?
I think that's a very personal, excuse me, I think it's a very personal decision
Yeah.
between the couple to have that conversation. What are our agreements? What are our boundaries? Whether it's agreements around how much porn are we going to watch together,
Mhm.
or how much porn is going to be in our life, versus are we going to open up the relationship? I've been in an open relationship before. I've counseled couples in open relationships before. I've seen some examples where it's been very helpful for
Mm,
a couple if their relationship is really solid underneath. That's obviously the most important prerequisite. I think a lot of couples go into open relationships because they're struggling underneath and they
mhm,
don't have a strong foundation. And often it's one person, generally the person who's not having the sex they want or as much sex as they want, who tries to push for the open relationship. But all of this comes down to communication, being authentic, being vulnerable, listening to each other, understanding where each other is coming from, and being honest with each other when things don't start to feel good, and not letting it get so far down that slope.
mm,
Like really I counsel all my couples to have ideally a daily check-in, but at least 3 times a week check-in
yeah,
where we just sit and we talk with each other about, like, how are we feeling about the relationship? Did anything happen in the last couple of days, if we haven't repaired it, that we need to talk about, to really
mhm,
keep those lines of communication open so that things don't get too far down the road where then it's hard to
right,
pull back. But these are all complicated issues, and couples have to work on the relationship.
right,
It really flows easily all the time. Yeah, there's
yes,
ups and downs and
yeah,
highs and lows, but the more skills you have, the more work you do around this, the easier things start to evolve over
mhm.
time.
Yeah, and I think coming back to that is often trying to be aware of what problem are you trying to solve before you're proposing a solution,
Mhm.
because the solution you might be offering could potentially make the problem worse.
Right.
So really thinking it through, And I think that's part of the problem. The other question I had for you is what about it could be for both people in the relationship or one, if someone has had a lot of experience before coming in,
Mm.
can that affect them in the relationship or both people? But how does having a lot of experience from the past factor in? Can that cause some issues?
I've seen it. I don't know that causing issues for me, at least in my experience, is causing issues as much as it being something that feels uncomfortable to talk about.
Mm,
So a lot of times there's discomfort talking about what happened in previous relationships, especially if they're in a long-term relationship in there, they just got together in their mid 30s or their
yeah.
40s even. And so I think sometimes it makes it challenging because of shame, because I'm afraid to tell you that this other partner was amazing and gave me amazing head that you're not doing, right? So there's all of these ways in which I think some couples do not want to share. Generally speaking, my philosophy is to try to share if there's a reason to share. If you've had some sort of sexual experience in the past that was amazing that you haven't had with your partner, without shaming or blaming them or putting pressure on them, but letting them know, "Oh, I had this experience." You don't have to give all the details, but I had this experience. This is what happened. I really enjoyed it, or this happened and I really didn't enjoy
Mhm.
it. But I'm definitely more in the full disclose more rather than less. But again, you can only do that if you're feeling pretty much emotionally safe in that relationship, right?
Mhm.
And you're not afraid that this is going to cause some kind of rift. The other place that I see it show up pretty frequently is one partner has more experience than the other. And the partner who is more experienced feels that the partner who's less experienced is not being able to give them what they want. And there's frustration around that, but they don't really want to express it because they don't want to make their partner feel bad for not having a lot of
Mhm.
experience or not being a good lover.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, again, for example, coming to one of my retreats where like we just put this all out on the table and in a very like friendly, objective way, we're teaching skills constantly
Mhm.
is an opportunity for people to learn something that they haven't learned before, as well as be able to explore with their partners fantasies, peak sexual experience, so that they begin to really understand, well, why was that such a turn on for you? Because again, 90% of the time, it's not just the physical experience. We all think everybody comes and says to me, like, we just want to learn different positions. And I'm like, okay. But I know, and
Yeah.
generally speaking, we don't get to it, maybe a little bit, but I know that it's not about different positions. It's about feeling connected. It's
Mm.
about understanding their sexual style. Are they interested in kink? Are they more sensual? Are they more in the tantra sacred sexuality world? Do they even know what that is to be able
Mhm.
to explore that, right? And then really getting to like, what are the emotions that they really want to feel,
Mhm.
right? Is it that they always want to be titillated, so you're having to constantly try something new and different
Mhm.
because that's a desire for them.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the one last thing we had talked about was often sex can be weaponized too, so it could be withheld as a form of punishment,
Totally.
which can be a form of abuse
Yep.
in a relationship. What are your thoughts around that? Because that, to me, doesn't sound healthy, but
Mm.
it can also come from a place of hurt, right? If I'm hurt,
Yeah.
I don't necessarily wanna be intimate. So, how do people navigate that? And I think we've touched on it in many different ways, but that communication piece, even in those moments, is really crucial that, "Hey, I'm feeling
Hurt.
hurt," or "There's
Mhm.
something going on here. I don't feel seen or heard by you, so I'm not really in the mood for intimacy." But how do you build on that rather than using it as a weapon?
It's very hard for people to see that
Mm.
themselves, right?
Mhm.
I think it's very hard for us to look outside of ourselves and see, "Oh, I've been withholding sex from my partner for 6 weeks because I'm really angry
Mm.
about something that he said to me 7 weeks ago," right?
Right.
I think it's hard for us to see that.
Yeah.
And I think it's normal. I think it's normal human behavior. Like, but what it really comes down to is like when we're not feeling emotionally connected and safe with our partner, we don't want to be intimate with them. It doesn't feel safe to expose yourself to that level when that person hurt you. And recognizing this is why, again, for me, this is all preventative care, if you will.
Right.
Right? This is why having daily check ins, if I could have caught that 6 weeks ago and said to you, well, when you said that thing to me at the party, I felt really dismissed and hurt,
Yes.
we wouldn't be where we are right now.
Mhm.
And we have to repair that. That's the first thing. And then we have to recognize that maybe that's a pattern inside of us. I do this exercise in my repair. When I teach this repair process where people have to write down like all of the things that makes it hard to be in a relationship with them, not with your partner, but with them, right? So that you own your own stuff, which
Mhm.
is part of the repair process. And maybe that's something I need to know. Like I can be a little passive aggressive. That's one of my defense
Mhm.
mechanisms, right? So going back to your thing about knowing yourself,
Mhm.
right? Knowing all of your protective strategies, the way that you defend yourself and how that particularly in the context of a romantic relationship is really important.
Yes. Yeah, because I could easily see that becoming a tit for tat, which
Oh,
again,
100%.
yeah, it can be a slippery slope as well. Janae, thank you so much for this conversation. Obviously, not an easy one for people, but obviously it's part of your work. But for people that want to learn more about your work, I know you touched on your book. So, what are some ways they can find all of that?
Yeah. So I have a new book that just came out, or it's about to come out, which is called The Sex and Intimacy Repair Kit: How to Enhance Communication and Create a Lifetime of Passionate Intimacy. And you can find out about me and all of my work if you go to this website, howtoimprovemylovelife.com, howtoimprovemylovelife.com,
Mhm.
where talking about skills, you're going to receive this awesome free gift, which is 20 minutes to improve your sex life. It's essentially 7 3-minute videos with very specific little tips and tools that you can use in order to feel more connected with your partner and to start to make some changes to your intimacy life, because I think that's really important for all of us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for all of that. We'll definitely put it in the show notes, but really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me and for hosting this awesome podcast.